Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Jonathan Edwards.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Jonathan Edwards.
Diolch, Mr. Speaker. The UK now has 104 billionaires, top of the global league. London alone has 72 billionaires, the top city in the world. Meanwhile, West Wales and the Valleys is also in the top 5 poorest regions in Western Europe. Is the Prime Minister at all concerned? Or is he like Labour's Lord Mandelson, intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich?
What I can say to the honourable gentleman, what is worthwhile, is the massive fall in unemployment and the increase in employment that we've seen across our country. In terms of in Wales today, in Wales unemployment has fallen by 5,000 in the last quarter and fallen by 25,000 since the last election. That means that in Wales there are 59,000 more people in work. In terms of making sure that the richest in our country pay their taxes, actually we see the richest 1% paying a greater percentage of income tax than ever they did under Labour. What we're seeing is a broad-based recovery, and I want to make sure that everyone in our country can benefit, and that's why we're cutting people's taxes and allowing people to keep the first £10,000 of what they earn before they pay any income tax.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, at the end of November, Mrs. Anne Gloag, a director of the Stagecoach Company, acquired Manston Airport in my constituency for £1. On Budget Day this year, Mrs. Gloag announced that she was going into consultation with a view to closing an airport, which is worth hundreds of jobs, is a major diversion field and a search and rescue base. Mr. Speaker, since then, my honourable friend, the member for South Thanet, and I have sought to find a buyer. Last night, the River Oak Company of Connecticut, who already have airport interests, put in an enhanced and realistic offer to keep Manston open, save the jobs, and develop the business. At present, the owners are reluctant to negotiate. Mr. Speaker, I don't expect my right honourable friend to engage in commercial negotiations, but will he seek to ensure that the CAA operating licence remains open, that Manston remains open, and that further discussions are held, and will he encourage those discussions to take place?
The Prime Minister.
I know that my honourable friend has been fighting very hard with the honourable member for Thanet South about the future of Manston Airport and recognise that it has played an important role in the local economy and employed local people. Ultimately, the future of Manston remains the responsibility of the airport owner, but I do think it's important that the government is engaged, and I know my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, is engaged. He will be speaking to Mrs. Gloag about this issue and also contacting River Oak, the potential purchasers. In the end, they have to make a commercial decision, but the government will do everything it can to help.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the fall in unemployment. For all of those people who have found work, it's good for them and good for their families. And on the subject of high-skilled jobs in the UK, following the appearance of Pfizer at the Select Committee yesterday, can the Prime Minister tell us what further assurances he's seeking from Pfizer about their takeover of AstraZeneca?
Well, first of all, can I welcome the fact that he has welcomed the fall in unemployment? These are, of course, jobs that he predicted would never come to Britain and would never be there. But it is important because what we see today is the largest ever quarterly increase in the number of people in work, 283,000. We see unemployment coming down, youth unemployment coming down, long-term unemployment coming down, and long-term youth unemployment coming down, with, of course, in our growing economy, where our long-term economic plan is working, we see the number of vacancies going up. Honourable members may be interested to know, in addition, that 3/4 of the new jobs over the last year have gone to UK nationals, and also that the employment of Romanians and Bulgarians actually went down in the first 3 months of this year following the lifting of the controls, which I think is notable. In terms of Pfizer and AstraZeneca, this government has been absolutely clear that the right thing to do is to get stuck in to seek the best possible guarantees on British jobs, on British investment and British science. Now, we discussed this last week, and one of the most important things we've learnt since last week is that the right honourable gentleman was asked for a meeting with Pfizer, but he said he was too busy political campaigning. He quite literally put party politics ahead of the national interest.
Miliband.
I'm not going to take any lectures from the guy. I'm really not going to take any lectures from the guy who was negotiating with Pfizer over the heads of the board of AstraZeneca. Pfizer doesn't need a PR man. They've got the Prime Minister. Now, for members on all sides of the House, the appearance of Pfizer at the Select Committee raised more questions than it answered about the so-called assurances. The head of Pfizer said there will be a fall in research and development spending as a result of the takeover. Has the Prime Minister got an assurance that these R&D cuts will not take place in the UK?
We want the strongest possible guarantees, but I have to ask him, what is the way of getting those guarantees? Is it getting stuck in with Pfizer and AstraZeneca, battling for the British interest, or is it standing back like he's done, doing absolutely nothing apart from playing politics? That is the point I would put to him. Now, I'm clear what the British interest is. It is British jobs, British science, British R&D, and we'll do everything we can to make those guarantees that we've received, and he would have got nothing, as firm as possible. But as we do so, let us remember this: 175,000 employed in life sciences in our country because we are an open economy that encourages investment. Eli Lilly, Novartis, Johnson & Johnson, Eisai, they've chosen to come and invest here because it's a great company to come and do business.
The problem is, Mr. Speaker, that his assurances are vague, have caveats, and are inappropriate. Not my words, but the words of the President of the Royal Society. His assurances are useless, and there's no guarantee on R&D. Now let's talk about jobs. On jobs, the head of Pfizer said yesterday, and I quote, "There will be job cuts somewhere." Has he got an assurance that these job cuts won't take place in the UK?
We have assurances on the percentage of R&D that will happen here, on investment in Cambridge, on investment in Macclesfield. If he's arguing, do we want further assurances? Yes, we do. Do we want to make sure those jobs stay here? Yes, we do. Do we want more investment in British universities and British science? Yes, we do. The only difference between us is how do you get those things? I say, get stuck in, negotiate hard, fight for Britain. He says, stand up, play politics and put that before the national interest.
But Mr. Speaker, his negotiations aren't working. They're worthless. On R&D, on jobs, he has no answer. Now let's try him on another one: the possible carving up of the merged company. Nobody wants a company to be bought, split up, and then sold off. Has he got assurances that won't happen in the case of this takeover?
What we want is a good outcome for British investment and British jobs. But we know what happens if you take the approach of the Labour Party. Let us remember Kraft and Cadbury. What did we have? We had outright opposition, wonderful speeches about blocking investment, and then complete and abject surrender and the closure of plants under Labour. That is what happened. We've learnt the lessons of the mistakes Labour made. We're operating under the framework that they left us, incidentally, which he wrote while he was at the Treasury, and we will get results for British science, British jobs and investment by being engaged rather than standing off and playing politics.
We all know what happened the last time he got assurances. He sold off Royal Mail at a knockdown price, and the Chancellor's best man made a killing. That's what happens with his assurances. Now the truth is he can't give us a guarantee. He can't give us a guarantee because the Chief Executive says, and I quote, he wants to conserve the optionality of splitting up the company and flogging it off. Now, last week, the Prime Minister said he would judge the takeover on British jobs, British investment and British science. But he can't offer us assurances on any of those things. Isn't it obvious? He should have a proper test of the public interest, and if the deal doesn't pass, he should block it.
Well, once again, he raises this issue about the public interest test. It is worth asking which party, which government, indeed which individual, when he was sitting in the Treasury writing the rules, got rid of that test. It was the Right Honourable Gentleman. That is what we see on a day when unemployment is down, on a day when more people are in work. He will try any trick other than to talk about what is happening in our economy. That's the truth. The country is getting stronger and he is getting weaker.
Mr. Speaker, he may not think it's important to talk about a company that is 2% of UK exports, on which 30,000 jobs depend. It is important. It is crucial to our national interest. And the truth is, he's not powerless. He's the Prime Minister. He could act on a public interest test. We're talking about one of our most important companies. Nobody is convinced by his assurances. And why won't he intervene, Mr. Speaker? Because he's falling back on the old idea that the market always knows best and doesn't need rules. From Royal Mail to AstraZeneca, this is a Prime Minister whose ideology means he cannot stand up for the national interest.
If he thinks these companies are important, why didn't he meet with them rather than going canvassing? That is what he did. He quite literally put his own party political interest ahead of the national interest. And what he fails to understand is, yes, we measure the British interest in British jobs, British science and British investment, but we also measure it on being a country that is open to overseas investment. There's a reason why companies and countries are coming here to make cars, to build aeroplanes, to build trains, to fabricate oil rigs, to make new drugs in our country. It's because we've cut taxes, we welcome investment, we're growing our economy, and we got more people in work. We will take absolutely no lectures from the people who brought this economy to their knees.
Mr. Stephen Gilbert. I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman is delighted to be greeted by such acclamation. Mr. Stephen Gilbert.
Much, Mr. Speaker. The sun is shining and people are wisely preparing to come to Cornwall for their holiday. When they arrive, however, they will see that some of the recent storm damage still hasn't been put right. Mr. Speaker, Cornwall doesn't just need a long-term economic plan, we also need help today. Will he meet with me to see what more can be done?
I'm very happy to go on discussing with Cornish MPs and indeed with the Cornish Unitary Council to make sure we do everything we can to help Cornwall get back onto its feet after the storms. What I've said very clearly is that there's the money under the Bellwyn scheme, so all of the emergency funding that Cornwall had to spend, it can claim back, and it still has time to work on that claim. We've also increased the amount of money going through the Environment Agency to repair storm damage, and there's an opportunity for Cornwall to have a real benefit of that money as well. So the sun is shining. I'm sure people are preparing for going to Cornwall, and I know when they get there they'll have a very good time.
Mr. Ian McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Public Accounts Committee criticised the MOD for failing to account for a £1.2 billion underspend, and it went on to say that this might result in even higher spending in future years. Does the Prime Minister still think he was right to say that he's balanced the books at the MOD?
I seem to remember coming to government where we were left with a £38 billion black hole. So if the criticism is that the Secretary of State is careful with the pounds and the pennies and makes sure that there's an underspend that then can on occasion be carried forward into further investment to make sure we have the very best equipment for our troops, I rather suspect he might plead guilty.
Stephen McPartland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stevenage continues to lead the economic recovery, and unemployment figures today show our long-term economic plan is working. Will the Prime Minister join with me in congratulating the educational institutions and businesses in my constituency that have increased the number of apprenticeship starts from just over 200 in 2010 to over 800 apprenticeship starts a year now?
No, well, my honourable friend is right. In Stevenage, unemployment has fallen by 24% over the last year, which shows that our long-term economic plan is working. And every single one of those people is not just a statistic, but someone who has the dignity, the security, and the peace of mind of a pay packet to help them and their families. Increasing the number of apprenticeships is an absolutely vital part of our long-term economic plan. We've seen 1.7 million new apprentices under this government. We're aiming for 2 million. We need to do more to encourage small and medium-sized firms to take on apprentices, but the work's going well.
Mr. Alex Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a 61% increase in the number of working families claiming housing benefit in the Stockton borough. Isn't this further proof that the jobs he claims to have created are generally low-paid, part-time and zero-hour contracts which don't pay enough to meet the rent?
What I can tell him is that in the Stockton North constituency, unemployment has fallen by 23% over the past year. And actually, if he looks at the unemployment figures, he'll see that the number of people in part-time work who want full-time work has actually fallen, as increasingly people are able to find the full-time work that they want. Yes, of course, there is an increase in the number of people in work claiming housing benefit because there's a increase in the number of people in work. That's what's happening in our country. We're getting the country back to work.
Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will know that thousands of my constituents in England are currently forced to use the NHS in Wales. So they will be concerned about yesterday's Trusted to Care report, which showed serious failings in the care of frail older people at 2 NHS hospitals in Wales. Don't the people of Wales and my constituents deserve better?
These are, as I understand it, these are very concerning reports which really do need to be studied because the NHS in Wales is not in a good state. We've seen an 8% cut to the NHS budget in Wales, carried through by Labour. The last time A&E targets were met in Wales was 2009. The last time the urgent cancer treatment target was met was in 2008. We really see some problems in the NHS in Wales, and frankly, the Labour Party, instead of chatting to each other on the front bench, should be getting a grip of this issue and sorting out the NHS.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the Pfizer boss did give assurances to the Business Committee yesterday. He gave an absolute assurance that any takeover of AstraZeneca would result in a fall in research and development into new drugs in the UK. He gave an absolute assurance that it would result in a fall in UK jobs. And the AstraZeneca boss said it could put lives at risk. How can any Prime Minister worth the title not immediately conclude that the right thing to do in the national interest is to call this in?
As I explained to his right honourable friend, we are operating under the legal framework put in place by the government that he was a member of. I actually think when he looks at the record of what was said yesterday, I think he'll find that the quotes he gives are not actually, in fact, accurate.
Andrew Salu.
Does the Prime Minister agree that the building of vital roads like the A5-M1 link Dunstable Northern Bypass will create even more jobs, and that continued infrastructure investment like this is a key part of our long-term economic plan?
I agree. I've spent some time in his constituency, stuck on the A5, and I know how much it does need this remedial work done. It's absolutely vital for this part of our country. We're investing more in our railways than at any time since Victorian times, and we're investing more in our roads than at any time since the 1970s, and it is absolutely key to the success of our long-term economic plan.
Jerry McCarthy.
Is there a good reason why the Prime Minister won't condemn the tax affairs of Tories supporting Gary Barlow as morally wrong?
I couldn't have been clearer that I condemn all of these aggressive tax avoidance schemes. And not more than just condemning them, this government has taken action, legislative action, to say to people, to coin a phrase, we want your money back for good.
Mr. William Cash. Thank you, Mr. Order! Let's have a respectful silence for Mr. William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will know that my International Development Gender Equality Act came into force last night. Will he note that this will protect women and girls throughout the world And furthermore, that particularly in places like Nigeria and Syria, it provides an opportunity to be able to do whatever we can to relieve their tragedy. Will he be good enough to have a word with the Secretary of State, our excellent Secretary of State for International Development, and do whatever we can to use this Act to help those people who are being so severely afflicted?
Well, I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in commending the honourable gentleman for his bill and for his legislative achievement to get this important measure on the statute book. This year, Britain is taking some huge steps forward, using the power of our aid budget and the fact we've met our aid pledge to really try and drive change in our world to end forever the scandals of forced and early marriage and female genital mutilation. We're in a really strong position to drive change on this. He mentioned Nigeria, and today I can announce that we've offered Nigeria further assistance in terms of surveillance aircraft and a military team to embed with the Nigerian army in their HQ, and a team to work with the US experts to analyse information on the girl's location. As I said last week, this was an act of pure evil. The world is coming together, not just to condemn it, but to do everything we can to help the Nigerians find these young girls.
Mr. Mark Hendrick.
Mr. Speaker, 50,499 ambulances have been waiting in queues of at least half an hour at accident and emergency units up and down the country. What's he going to do about it?
What we are doing about it is making sure that the £12.7 billion extra that we are putting into the NHS, unlike the Labour NHS cut in Wales, is going to good use. And we can actually see in our NHS we have 1.2 million more people attending accident and emergency. And over this winter period, we met our targets for accident emergency. I remember the last time the Labour leader raised our hospitals at Prime Minister's questions. It was back in November. He hasn't had a word to say about it since. He predicted a winter crisis. He sat there day after day, dying for it to happen. It didn't happen because we got a strong NHS with more doctors, more nurses serving our country.
Mr. Greg Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is well aware of the wonderful work done by the Royal British Legion Battleback Centre with our brave servicemen and women who've been injured in conflict through adaptive sports and adventurous training. At the end of this month, I will be joining a team from the Battleback Centre with the honourable members for Bassetlaw and Chatham and Aylesford to raise awareness for this wonderful work, and will the Prime Minister wish us every success in this aim?
I will certainly wish my honourable friend and the honourable gentleman from across the House are taking part in this, wish the honourable gentlemen and ladies and wish them well. The British Legion plays an absolutely key part in our country in terms of standing up for veterans and their interests and making sure that we raise money and serve them properly. We work very closely with them in government. The Battleback Centre that he spoke about is an extraordinary facility in our country. I wish him well and hope that the fundraising goes well.
Dr. Ailey Whiteford.
When the Prime Minister goes up to Scotland later this week, will he explain to our agricultural producers and rural communities why by 2019 we will be receiving the lowest level of support per hectare, not just of any country in the UK, but of any country in the whole EU? Perhaps that explains why he doesn't want to publish his secret poll on support for independence.
What I will be explaining on my visit to Scotland is how Scotland is better off inside the United Kingdom, that we have all of the negotiating power of the United Kingdom around the table to get a good deal for Scotland, whereas of course an independent Scotland would have to queue up behind other countries to get back into the European Union. And specifically on agriculture, because of the hard work of my right honourable friend, the Agriculture Secretary, we're actually making sure that there will be extra support for Scottish farmers, absolutely in line with what the Scottish Government has been asking for.
Richard Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to the Watford Chamber of Commerce, this year Watford will benefit from a total of £1.5 billion in new investment. Already started, we've got a new road, we've got 2 train stations, we've got 2 secondary schools being refitted, and we've got a brand new UTC. And to cap all that, today there's been an announcement that unemployment is 667 less than a year ago. Wow. But I'm very concerned that this continues. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister what his strategy is to make sure this continues. If he takes my advice, Mr. Speaker, he'll come up with something that is one long-term, two economic and three a plan.
First of all, can I say to my honourable friend how welcome it is that unemployment in Watford over the last year has fallen by 30%. We're getting the people of Watford back to work and cutting unemployment. What he says about these important investments in terms of the Croxley rail link with the 2 new stations and indeed rebuilding and building new schools are absolutely vital. The long-term plan is not just about jobs and cutting taxes, important as those are. It's also about supporting business, and small business in particular, by building the infrastructure that we need. Because we've taken difficult long-term decisions, we're able to put this extra investment into our roads and railways to build a modern infrastructure for the 21st century.
Mr. Khalid Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2011, the government stated that being able to see a GP within 48 hours was not a priority. Does this Prime Minister regret this?
Well, if you listen to the Royal College of GPs, they're saying that there are something like 40 million more GP appointments since 2010. The patient survey, always quoted by Labour ministers when they were in government, says that 93% of people say that appointments in the GP system are convenient. But frankly, I want more. As the father of 3 young children, I know how important it is to get timely GP appointments. That's why we're training 5,000 more GPs. That's why we have a named GP now for frail and elderly people. That's why we've got 1,000 GP centres that are now open 8 till 8 and at weekends. I tell you what I do regret. I regret the fact that the last Labour government signed a contract with the GPs that meant that they didn't have to offer a service out of hours or at the weekend. Now, because of the investment we're putting into the NHS, actually we're providing better services. And if he's wondering about the idea of a 48-hour target, he might want to ask why Labour scrapped one in Wales.
Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ribble Valley Council has recently approved its core strategy. Will he reassure local councillors that this will now give them extra power to protect those areas within the Ribble Valley that are not already earmarked for development? And will he come and visit the Ribble Valley and see for himself why the Ribble Valley is consistently voted one of the best places to live in the United Kingdom, and why local people want to keep it that way?
So, well, I look forward to visiting my honourable friend's constituency and broader constituencies in Lancashire as well. I think the assurance I can give him is this, is when local councils put in place their local plan, they'll have far greater ability to determine how much housing, what sort of housing and where it goes. That is what we're trying to put in place, and the faster local councils can put in the local plans, the more power and responsibility they'll have.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister has acknowledged, the number of people who are in work but who have to claim housing benefit in order to make ends meet is growing, but the cost of that will be an extra £5 billion over the course of this Parliament. Does the Prime Minister really consider that a sign of success?
The most important thing we've done with respect to housing benefit, of course, was to put a cap on it, because when we came to office, there were families claiming £60,000, £70,000, £80,000. But when we put that cap on housing benefit, what was the Labour reaction? It was to vote against it. When we said that housing benefit shouldn't be paid in respect of spare rooms that people aren't using in order to make savings, what was Labour's attitude? To oppose it. That is what's happening. Look, the good news from his seat in Stalybridge and Hyde is here's something that's not going up. It's unemployment, and it's down 31% in Stalybridge and Hyde. Now, of course, some of those people in work are claiming housing benefit, but because of this government's long-term economic plan, more of his constituents are in work and earning.
Mr. Andrew Percy.
Mr. Speaker, the extra flood defence funding for the Humber area following the tidal surge in December was most welcome, but many of my constituents are still out of their homes, and there is concern moving forward that we get the 300 million that's needed over the next 25 years. MPs in the Humber are working cross-party on this and cross-Humber. Will the Prime Minister meet with us so that we can convince him of the case of treating the Humber, which is so important to our economic recovery, as a special case given its high risk of, from flooding?
Well, I had an experience of very positive and good meetings with members of Parliament for the Humberside on a cross-party basis. We worked very hard to make sure that Siemens investment went into Hull, which is going to bring not just jobs to that factory, but I believe a whole new industry and supply chain into the area. Very happy to meet with him and discuss flooding and other issues to make sure we do all we can to protect people's homes and businesses.
Mr. Tom Clark.
Mr. Speaker, while I welcome the efforts to rescue the schoolgirls in Nigeria, will the Prime Minister agree that the Nigerian government hasn't lifted a finger to protect its own citizens in the north as they were attacked by Boko Haram? And will he agree to urge them to support their own people and to seek to introduce peace to the unhappy nation?
Well, I would say to the right honourable gentleman who has considerable knowledge of overseas development and these affairs, I don't think his description of the Nigerian government is entirely fair. They do face a very vicious terrorist organisation in terms of Boko Haram. They are investing in and training their armed forces and counter-terrorism abilities. We have worked with them on that, and we're willing to do more work with them on that, particularly if we can make sure that proper processes are in place for dealing with human rights issues. But we should help across a broad range of areas, not just counter-terrorism, surveillance and helping them find these people, but also working with the global fund promoted by the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Kirkcaldy and Kirkcaldy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. In terms of protecting more schools.
Mr. David Amis.
My mother Maud recently celebrated her 102nd birthday. While she was just a child in the First World War, she thinks it's entirely right that in this the centenary of the outbreak of that great war, we honour those who lost their lives. But will my right honourable friend also ensure that we remember all the horses that were lost, as depicted in that wonderful play War Horse?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's not just that wonderful play, and Joey the horse actually came on my recent business trip to China and caused quite a stir, but it's also that magnificent memorial in Park Lane to all the animals that died in the war. I think it's important we commemorate the 100th anniversary appropriately. We do it not only in 2014 this year, but also we commemorate Gallipoli, we commemorate Jutland, and of course we commemorate the armistice and the peace to follow.
Order.